We ready? Say again? Good evening. Welcome to Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May 16th, 2024. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Commissioners who are present for this meeting, evening's meeting, are at City Hall. We also have staff from the city attorney and clerk's offices, as well as city planning department. If you're joining us on Zoom this evening, we can see that you are here. Probably going to skip over some of this unless there are no attendees, so I can skip over that part. Tonight, will we not be taking any public testimony because the only application we have will be continued, just as in case you're here to testify for that. Okay. And with that, we'll just go ahead and begin with roll call. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Garrett? Commissioner Grace?
Here.
Commissioner Lorcher?
Here.
Commissioner Sandoval?
Present.
Chairperson Seal?
Here. All right, first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. File number H 2023-0043 for Bladen subdivision will be open for the sole purpose of continuing to a regularly scheduled meeting. It will be open for that purpose alone. So if there's anybody here tonight to testify for that application, we will not be taking public testimony. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and we have 3 items on the consent agenda. First is approve the minutes of the May 2nd, 2024 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Second is to approve the summary minutes of the May 7th, 2024 joint meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission with Meridian City Council. Third is for the, I'm forgetting the wording on this.
Mr. Chairman, the findings.
Findings of facts and conclusions of law. That's it. Findings of facts and conclusions of law for Idaho Pup and Ales. File number H 2024-0006. Thank you. Can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right. I'll go ahead and kind of skip through the public hearing process since we won't really have a public hearing tonight. And at this time, I'd like to continue the public hearing for item number H 2023-0043 for Bladen subdivision for a continuance to June 20th, 2024.
Do you need a motion on that, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2023-0043 for Bladen subdivision to June 20th, 2024. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Item is continued. And with that, we will go on to item number 6, which is the presentation and discussion regarding commission best practices. And staff can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That will be me, I believe, this evening, although it's more of a discussion than a presentation. So Mr. Starman, I think, at least knows some of the presentation I'm going to speak on. Mr. Parsons is here as well. So feel free to interrupt, hit us up if you have any questions or want to talk about anything that's not on the presentation that I have prepared for you tonight. Maybe before I jump into that, you just approved the minutes for May 7th. I want to thank you for attending your time, providing the feedback on the staff report. We're fine tuning that, considering those, seeing what we can do, some things we can't. But again, just appreciate your time here meeting with council last week and your time this evening. So here is our agenda for this evening. You know, I recognize I'm standing between you and dinner and family and things, but I can stay as long as you like. I didn't time this. I don't know how long it would take. If you say nothing, or probably 15 minutes, but again, I anticipate more of a conversation. So again, please do feel free to interrupt if there's anything that doesn't make sense, or you want to dig deeper, or whatever the case may be. But here's what I'll be speaking on, facilitating the discussion on this evening. So the first one, and I'll say you've seen some of these slides in your orientation packet that we typically hand out to new commissioners. Here in a little bit towards the end, it's actually at the end of that packet as well, and often those slides get brushed to the side because we're running late on time and whatnot. But I think this one is just a good refresher, and I actually have a few slides on this. But it really talks about how the comprehensive plan is the policy document that enables the zoning code. So the implementation of zoning in the UDC really is foundationally in the comprehensive plan and some of those aspirational policies that are contained within the comprehensive plan. So this is something where the comp plan is powerful, but it's really visionary and aspirational, right? It's not a lot of, and we had this conversation too when we talked about some of the mixed use stuff, the shalls and the shoulds and the mays and the we want you to, but we can't require you to type of statements. Again, a little broader, more citywide aspirations than parcel specific conditions or regulations that would apply. But again, it sets the direction, as the slide says. It is very important. The comp plan is very important, and again, really defends and tees up, if you will, a lot of the zoning ordinances and the laws that we have there. But again, at the end of the day, the UDC carries the day and is the thing that we hang our hat on most of the time to say, you have to do this. This doesn't comply with code, and you have some more discretion when it comes to interpretation and application of the comprehensive plan. I don't necessarily expect you to read this. This is directly out of the comprehensive plan. But I did want to take this just a step further and talk then within the comprehensive plan, we have the future land use map designations, right? And there's a lot of confusion on, and I'm not trying to talk down to anybody this evening. I think a lot of you, all of you probably largely have a great grasp on this. But the future land use map designations do not directly correspond to zoning districts of the UDC. It's not a one-for-one. Low density on the comp plan does not mean R2 or R4. It can mean R2, it can mean R4. It does not mean R2 or, so there's not a direct correlation there, right? So again, same concept. Comp plan is higher level, visionary, kind of squishy. And then the zoning ordinance, once you get a zoning district and a designation, R4 means this is the size of your lots, these are your setbacks. It is very standard defining. So that's really what this slide says, especially that last paragraph. The comp plan future land use map helps push you in a general direction. And then when one of those zoning districts is chosen, then again, that is what really dictates how that property gets developed. So sorry, I'm driving that point home, but it is, again, it's they work in concert, but they're not the same. And then even just to take that one more step further, again, the UDC or our zoning codes, conditional use permits, subdivision ordinance, is the enabling code of the city, the UDC to, again, implement those standards. So this slide again is familiar in that handout. So at annexation and rezoning is really where you get to have a lot of discretion. You get to make the call. That's why you've been appointed by mayor and council. You have a good understanding of our community direction and what our community needs, especially when it comes to bringing property into the city from the county or rezoning it from an existing zone and upzoning something or downzoning something. That last finding under the annexation and rezoning is again pretty broad. Is this in the best interest of the community? You get to decide that. What's best, good. So there's a lot of subjectivity in that. Once you move all the way down then to, and a lot of times even in the site and zoning plans, you're kind of cut out of that. And this is really administrative by city staff. So it really is us just verifying that everything does meet code compliance and we don't get a whole lot of discretion on, yeah, but I really would rather you do this tone of brown on your building doors, or, you know, that's, we really don't have any control over that. So kind of further down that discretionary process you move, you know, the city as a whole loses discretion. So, and then in between, obviously, conditional use permits, you have a little bit more. That's sort of in the name, right? Anything you need to include to mitigate any negative impacts, you can put those conditions on a project or a property to make sure that they're mitigating their impact to the surrounding neighborhood. Subdivisions, even a little less. Again, we cover a lot of that in our subdivision ordinance. Although again, you know, things like amenity packages, you know, if you really think something needs a swimming pool, you do have some discretion there because that you know, there's points and you meet it, but especially if they're coming in for the zone they need to do that subdivision, and you're really like, I don't know if I just like, you know, the Walmart swing set and a barbecue as your amenity package for 400 homes, even though they may claim the points, you still have a little discretion in that. But a lot of subdivisions it's pretty standardized. And if your lots are 5,000 square feet and you have a 2-car garage, off you go. So again, I recognize you know some of that stuff, but I just wanted to reinforce that a little bit. So I'm going to move to the next topic. Is there anything kind of on that with comp plan and UDC zoning?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Often if we have a room full of people, it gets said by somebody, either the applicant or a commissioner, that something along the lines of, well, this has been on the books for many years, so I understand that you're upset that this is occurring, but you know, it's been planned, so to speak, for many years. Which part, or maybe it's all of these parts, I'm trying to apply what you've laid out to practical application. Is it, what part of this process makes that statement true? Is it the comp plan which set the aspirational goals? Is it the zoning when it's zoned that way? Or when the conditional use permit, or is it a combination of all of those things?
So I'll give you an answer, although I'm not quite sure that it directly addresses your question. So if we need to double back, and I can try again, but it's an iterative process. I'll start maybe in 2005. That is when we combined our, what we commonly now and lovingly refer to as the Unified Development Code. So we took Title 11 and Title 12 of City Code and made them one. And we take our subdivision ordinance and we put all of our zoning codes into one place and unified them. We did have a comp plan that was already on the books that helped us do that. And then in 2008, we did an update to our comprehensive plan. So again, it's iterative and both documents change over time. So I don't, those statements you say that, you know, likely comes up at a lot of hearings that this has been on the books for many years. I'm not quite sure if you're referring to a specific property that was maybe annexed and zoned in 1990, let's say. There are some entitlements that certainly have been out there for a long time. I'll use Paramount as an example. That's one that just jumps to mind. It was early 2000s, 2002, 2001, somewhere in there, where they got basically that whole square mile entitled, right? But the multifamily and the Dairy Queen and some of the things that are right there on the corner of McMillan and Meridian didn't develop until the last 5 years. So they were entitled, though, to do those things way back almost 20 years ago. So their phasing plan helped. Again, the city's comp plan and unified development code. In fact, Bill's got one coming to you, I think, next month, June, I believe, is the target date. We're always tweaking it, right? Our society and our community is not stagnant. And so things will, I'll say, evolve, some things devolve, but we change and we have to stay current with the times, and we need to address things and some of the loopholes maybe that have been exposed or just best practices. So 2005 was the last major change, if you will, the UDC, although open space and amenities, we had a steering committee here 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. That's fairly new. Again, the points, that's kind of a newer concept, at least for Meridian. And our comprehensive plan was adopted December of 2019. So it's fairly new for the life of a comp plan. We don't modify that all that often, but again, Brian McClure was here a couple months ago, 3 months ago, changing some of the mixed use standards, right? So again, your question, I don't know that I totally hit it, but hopefully that helps you understand that none of this is set in stone, and we check in with the community and we say, look, we can change the comp plan, we change the UDC, we change the UDC, we change the comp plan. They generally should, again, point you towards a similar vision in the standards and where we're trying to head as a community. But if you want to give me a little more specific example of when you remember someone saying, well, this has been on the books, it really is, it matters what's on the books.
I'm not sure I'll give a specific example. I might be able to come up with one, but I was going to kind of tag, I think it was a great description. What came to my mind, I think the first answer is probably depends on the context, and it probably is all of the above. When someone, someone testifies and make a comment like that, they could be referring to the comprehensive plan. They could be referring to a previous decision. When I hear that type of comment, though, so I'm just wearing my legal hat tonight. When I hear that type of a comment, I'm typically thinking that this property has some level of entitlement already, legal entitlement to do something. They're not coming in for an annexation for the first time or for their initial zoning in the city. They've already been through that process. They've been annexed. They probably had their initial zoning, or they would as part of the annexation. And there may be, likely would be a development agreement that says they're, with, at least in concept form, what they're able to develop on that piece of property. So oftentimes when I hear that type of comment, what I'm thinking about is that this property owner has already gone through some of the processes and they have entitlements in place, legal rights in place, and they're allowed to develop within those confines, within those parameters. If we don't allow that, then that's the makings for a potential claim for a takings argument, right? You gave me something, I have the entitlement to do something. Now you want to change your mind and take it away. That sounds like a taking. So that's how I kind of think about it from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say an example that I have in my mind is the northeast corner of Black Cat and McMillan. It had been around, it had been entitled for quite a long time. And we looked at it, and I think it was either the hearing after or within a month of basically recommendation of denial for the southeast corner of that intersection. So it was a really tough one to look at because basically all of us were thinking denial, but at the same time, they were already entitled to do what was on the books there. They were just enacting it at that point in time. And it was based on the information when it went through for the development agreement and the annexation. So that one to me sticks out as far as the scenario that you're talking about.
I think that's an excellent example for those that might recall those two projects actually that were very close to one another within a 2-year time frame. That's a great example where that smaller, I think it was maybe phase 7 of a project, that they already had their entitlements in place versus the larger project in the same area. I think it was annexation, I believe. And so we have a lot more discretion, as Caleb described, which is a good segue into 2 other quick thoughts on annexation, if I can add. So what, and again, I'm just kind of wearing this from a legal perspective, kind of giving that angle. So I would just echo what Caleb said, that really the city has the most discretion at the time when someone applies for annexation. That's for a couple of reasons. One is we're looking at from a very broad perspective, including whether it's in the city's best interest. Also, from a legal perspective, most decisions that you make and the city council make are subject to a petition for review to the district court. So things like conditional use permits, zoning decisions, anything that falls under the Local Land Use Planning Act, which is Idaho law that governs what we all do when we meet. The one exception to that is annexations. That's covered by a completely different title of the Idaho Code, and it's not subject to petition for review to the district court. So it has a different review, and really the city has a lot of discretion in terms of whether to approve or not, and courts rarely will question that decision about expansion of territory or city limits. I'm not saying it never happens. There is a way to get there sort of through the back door, and I won't go into the nuances, but as a just broad statement, very difficult to convince a court to overturn an annexation decision versus anything else that you deal with, conditional use permits, zoning decisions, plats, things of that nature. Those are all subject to petition for review by the court.
If I,
Go ahead.
Just a final thought on it, and that's really helpful, Kurt. I think it helps to know that when the city in some fashion has obligated itself in terms of the use of that land, there's obviously less discretion. But I guess where I was looking at it is lots of people might do think they do some research or do some research before they move here. And they often come up and say, well, I looked and I talked to the city before I built my house, and this wasn't planned, or this wasn't, and sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. But I just was sort of wondering where to plug in the sort of statement of, well, that's not actually true. It has been we have obligated ourselves to the legal use of that land. And
so if I can, I guess maybe just a little bit of advice that way. And I'm not calling anyone that's ever testified a liar, but you can ask, right? We don't require them to swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and all that. So I guess I would say when you hear those types of statements, you can fact check with us and maybe ask them a clarifying question. What do you mean by on the book? So we can help you with some statements like that if in fact you're wondering about what level of entitlement maybe exists with the property. Because I'll tie this back in here. The comp plan map designations can and do change. Not all of them, but we have changed them. So it could be true that when they bought their house, it was low density and now it's medium or high even. That could be a fair statement. But I think it's a good question to follow up, and maybe don't just take everything you hear as fact. We can help dig a little deeper and understand what that really means. And then a couple more just in that same vein. So something that, let's just say, was entitled 20 years ago, Paramount is the exception because that was a huge project in multiple phases, 25 phases or something like that. I mean, it was crazy. You don't get that very often. So if something was entitled, we do have a couple. There are actually some still. Eagle Overland have some really old entitlements out along Overland Road. But a lot of times they expire, right? So if there's a subdivision, it expires. If you don't record a plat in successive phases, project's dead. So it's very rare that you have something that's that old that is still valid. And also say an entitlement, someone say, well, I've got my zoning, I'm entitled to do this. There may be some truth to that. Typically, over the last 25 years or so anyways, pretty regularly, we put development agreements on properties. They're specific enough where it doesn't just allow anything. And a lot of times it'll address what you have to do to actually get real entitlement, if you will. We'll annex it in and we'll say, yeah, there's some level of entitlement, but sometimes they can take that claim and say, well, you can't tell me no, I'm entitled to it. I've got the zoning and it says this. Well, there may be a DA provision that says, yeah, but, right? usually when we did that, because it was so conceptual, we weren't sure, they weren't sure what they wanted to do with the property. So we didn't give them just a blank check. Here, go ahead and do anything in CG you want. You're on your way. That was pretty rare. So we can, you hear those types of statements, and we try to bring that to your attention too. There's another one that recently came through, and I won't use specific examples, that did have an R8 zoning. It was a low density, right? There's some level of their underlying zone allowed them to do this density. The neighbors didn't like it, but there is some level of entitlement. But again, I would just say, fact check, verify with us, whatever that looks like, or even ask clarifying questions. Maybe you can even fish that out of them, but.
One thing do you watch the council meetings?
Occasionally.
I have watched them more and more, and our council folks, especially,
Nary?
what's that?
Bill Nary? Or
No, Commissioner
council?
Kavanagh and Strader, they ask a lot of counter questions to, especially just public testimony, people that are coming up and giving testimony. And I have to say, especially Commissioner Kavanagh, he'll ask the question that everybody's wondering, like, especially to kind of the not in my backyard crowd, that he'll ask those questions. Would you rather this than this? What would you rather see here? What's your idea of that? Just trying to pull out, instead of just hearing the negative element to it, it's like, tell us what you want. Tell us what's, great for you. And that, a lot of times that'll set people back a little bit. Like, I didn't really think about that. I just don't want this, because generally all those public testimonies, or a lot of them, tend to start out with, I'm not against development, but I'm not against multifamily, but I'm not against whatever, but. So, the clarifying questions that come out of that. And like I said, Commissioner Kaffner especially is really good at that. He comes well armed.
I will just say, and this isn't to pat myself on the back, but I have some slides here that talk about the art of asking questions and prodding and things, and then also findings too. So we'll kind of bring some of these common threads of this part of the discussion back around here in a few more slides. So. All right, I do want to transition though, and again, it's related, but to private property rights. Kurt mentioned LUPA. I think he called it the Land Use Planning Act, but the local Land Use Planning Act of Idaho does require that the comp plans address private property rights. This one is, again, like a lot of things you do, tricky, right? There's different angles and lenses you can look at things through to say if something conforms or not. The private property rights balance, right? Or I like this, and I'm going to watch a little video, but whose property and who's right? I mean, there's two sides to that, right? I mean, so, and that, but it's an interesting, depending on what shoes you're wearing or who, what you're looking at, there's property rights on all sides. So we're back to some of that quasi judicial, and you get to judge a little bit in that and saying, okay, we're not harming anybody. This is a right and we're protecting things. But again, subjective words like sensible and value and good, like you get to decide what those things are and mean in particular cases. And that all comes back to our police powers and why I have a job and why you're there is we have the general health, safety, and welfare of our community. And everything we do should kind of be right there. Like, is this in the best interest of our community? So I do have a quick video I'd like to show you. So I'm going to try that real quick, if that's okay. Let's see if we can do this here. And I have a link to where I got this too. There's actually a series. I don't know. Some of you weren't on the commission at the time, but about a year, maybe a little more ago, I mentioned that Idaho chapter of the American Planning Association was putting together kind of a suite of videos. They have the first 7 done and available. So I have a link to that later, and you can go watch the other 6. I actually asked them for more. You get 7 just for going to their website. They like, if you want the rest of them, you have to log in and pay us a fee and stuff. So I have access to some more than what you could access on the website. But this one I thought was a pretty good one. They're all decent, and they're only all just a few minutes long. So This one I thought was a good one. Let's see if we go. Okay, I'm not hearing any sound. Crestron, that's right. Working earlier. No, it's not. No, it's just this one. Okay, I think that's working. Wonder why that got unchecked. Okay, try this again. Thank you.
My name is Mary Alice Taylor. I have my master's in public administration, and I am the energy and environment policy analyst for the Association of Idaho Cities. Today, I'm going to be talking about property rights and planning. The Local Land Use Planning Act, or LUPA, requires cities and counties to address 17 specific planning components in their comprehensive plans. The first one listed is property rights. LUPA requires comprehensive plans to analyze provisions which may be necessary to ensure that land use policies, restrictions, conditions, and fees do not unduly violate private property rights, adversely impact property values, or create unnecessary technical limitations on the use of property. Other components required to be addressed in the comprehensive plan include the suitability of certain types of land uses, economic base of the community, including agricultural, natural resources, adequacy of public services and facilities, including school, transportation, and utilities, hazardous conditions, and special areas or sites. Through the process of adopting a comprehensive plan, the aspirational policies for all those components of the plan, including property rights, are discussed and integrated to create the future community vision. It is through this community discourse that the balance between the public welfare versus individual property rights is maintained. However, the comprehensive plan is a statement of vision, not a regulatory document, and must be implemented by local ordinances. Comprehensive plans are implemented primarily through zoning. Zoning provides a regulatory framework to implement the comprehensive plan, including provisions related to the protection of private property rights. Private property rights are important. It's also important to recognize that how one person uses their land could have adverse impacts on the rights of other property owners and the whole community. This is why we regulate land use, primarily through zoning. Some considerations when finding the balance between private property rights and public welfare include sensible use of land increases property value. Value can be created by government. Value can be created in location. Downzoning does not equal loss of value, and land use protects values. Zoning is an exercise of police power, the purpose of which is to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Zoning fulfills that purpose by strategically planning for and separating land uses that may be harmful to more sensitive land uses, such as adult entertainment use adjacent to a school or an industrial use with noise and fumes in a residential neighborhood. Zoning controls the allowed uses, density, height, bulk, scale, and location of structures to protect the uses on adjoining properties. For example, failure to protect a single-family residential structure from another larger structure may impact the privacy, quiet, outdoor livability, and use of that structure. Zoning also protects the rights of all property owners by ensuring that adequate facilities are provided, such as parking and drainage. Finally, by distributing certain types of land uses into distinct and limited districts of like uses, zoning enables a community to achieve its goals for growth and economic development and protection of its resources and unique character, as in a downtown. Examples of good property rights stewardship are in Latah and Owyhee counties, which have adopted land use regulations that protect the right of individual property owners while fostering community goals for maintaining viable farm and ranch land and protecting rural values and lifestyle. In Owyhee County, they undertook a very public process of examining their land use zones countywide. As part of that process, they mailed a survey to every landowner in the county to get their input concerning various land uses and asked how they wanted the county to proceed with growth, particularly in the agricultural zone. Across all individual communities within their very large county, an average of 87% of residents wanted to see the agricultural land preserved and not allow the conversion of agricultural land to residential development. The results of that public process and the robust input from the public helped affirm the vision and goals of agricultural preservation set out in their comprehensive plan. When it comes to the agricultural zones in Owyhee County, they are unapologetically supportive of agriculture and honor the purpose and intent of the agricultural zone by not allowing it to be converted to low-density residential.
I think it's really interesting as I've gone through my career to remember those public hearing nights when the topic of private property rights became the focus of a hearing. It's particularly attention-getting for those who don't regularly attend such hearings to see the controversy that surrounds land use issues, and they think something's wrong. And in truth, it's really a symbol that something's right. land use happens at home or near your business. It's in the immediate surroundings of where you live and where you carry out your daily activities. And so it's not a casual matter for most people. It's one of those things that's really basic to their existence, is protecting their home, protecting their business.
The property rights issue is a challenge. And, you know, when we talk about protecting property rights, I think we're looking at it the wrong way. It's all property rights. It's whose property and what rights. And, you know, you hear that from both sides. You hear that from the developer, it's my property, it's my right to do as I want. And then you hear from the neighbors, it's my property and I don't want you to do anything that will affect it. It's always a balancing act.
Thankfully, local officials making these important decisions regarding property rights have help. The Idaho Attorney General's office has provided a comprehensive guide and checklist for regulatory takings. Visit their website. If the City Council or County Commission is worried a zoning decision may infringe on private property rights, legal counsel should be contacted. Under the state constitution, local government has been given the right, through zoning, to properly regulate or limit the use of private property to protect public health, safety, and welfare. However, if a government regulation destroys a fundamental property right, it could constitute a regulatory taking, resulting in compensation to the landowner. A taking can happen if a regulation destroys all use or value of a property, a condition or requirement imposes a disproportionate burden on a property, a regulation or condition is applied to property that has no legitimate public purpose, if a government action interferes with the vested rights, or if an exaction is made as a condition of a land use approval. Creating a sensible use of land through zoning and other development regulations creates and maintains property values and the communities where we and our future generations will want to live. Those charged with planning and zoning responsibilities walk a delicate balance of meeting those long-term goals with the rights of private property owners. One of the main jobs of a planning and zoning body is to plan for the future by balancing private property rights with the public good.
So hopefully you found some value in watching that short video, reinforcing some of the things we've already talked about tonight. There are some more resources on private property rights. I'm gonna, I think, transition to the next topic unless there's anything there. Kurt mentioned takings, and that was the last part of that video. If we want to spend a little bit more time on that, or private property rights, if there's any comments or anything like that, I'm going to jump back into my presentation now. Okay. Defining residential density. So the first bullet there is, number of units per acre. So we're done. I guess we can move on to the next slide. No, really, there's more to it than that. So, and I really, there's actually two kind of topics that I want to talk about in one. So, one of them is the transition that comes up a lot, right? An appropriate transition. So that's kind of also in defining density. I already mentioned some of this in some of my opening remarks with comp plan, zoning and density and future land use map designations, and I'll touch on that a little bit more too. First, though, I want to start by saying the comp plan. Anytime you hear us refer to density in the comprehensive plan, it's always using gross. So we're considering just the overall acreage, doesn't take out anything for roadways or right-of-ways or waterways or really undevelopable land, if you will. So we're talking a gross density. The UDC, though, does define both net and gross. It doesn't define density as much. It defines it, but it doesn't use it in some of its calculations in the UDC. So again, as an example, R4 does not mean 4 dwelling units per acre. It's just R4. It's residential and it's medium low density residential, but it does not equate to a maximum of 4 or a minimum of 4 dwelling units per acre. It's just a number. Same with the 2, the 4, the 8, the 15. They are numbers. Sometimes there is some correlation, but again, we took that out. Geez, that's probably been 5 years where we took more than that even, where we took the density calculation out. If you meet the minimum lot sizes and the open space and the other code requirements of doing a subdivision, the density just essentially works itself out, but it is possible that if you had a cul-de-sac stubbed to your property and you just lined out lots along it, you could get more than 4 dwelling units per acre in an R4. Doesn't happen very often. Typically it's less than that. So, but it is confusing to people, right? It is, well, the density shows that this is, 4.4 and this is an R4. How can that be? Well, that in the zoning doesn't necessarily equate. I just want to read to you maybe, and this thought goes with what we've already talked about before, with the comp plan being the guide, the visionary document, kind of citywide. I want to read you a few comprehensive policies that talk about density. So the first one is locate higher density. I don't know what that means, but locate higher density housing near corridors with existing or planned transit in downtown and in proximity to employment centers. I'm kind of joking, but the higher part, again, there's discretion in that. 2 is higher than 1, 3 is higher than 2. I don't know. And that doesn't mean R15 or R40 necessarily. It could just be more higher, right? So here's the next one I want to read to you. Consider incentives such as density bonuses, reduced open space requirements, and reduced fees for infill development in key areas near existing services. Key areas? Key area could be near my house or your house or downtown. And we do define some of these things, but again, it's not an exact. You can interpret it. There's a little bit of wiggle room in here. Here's another one. Consider population/housing density and accessibility when acquiring future land use for parks and recreation. That's more of an internal thing for the city. You probably won't run into that a lot of times dealing with development. Okay, here's the next one. Require all new development to create a site design compatible with surrounding uses. And then there's a list through buffer screening, transitional densities, and other best site design practices. Encourage, as appropriate, the continued use of land for farming near areas of city impact boundaries to effectively transition from rural uses to urban. So some of my point there is it's leading you down a path, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to get there, right? And you have some ways to interpret some of those directions, the visionary statements we want to go as a city, but it's not going to say you apply that right on that property right there. That's for that project. And we'll help you in staff reports too. We'll cite those, we'll interpret that, we'll apply it as we deem appropriate. But you can, again, draw your own conclusions on a lot of that. So we also do encourage with the comprehensive plan a mix of housing types within all neighborhoods. So monotonous Meridian is not the goal of the comprehensive plan. It says encourage a mix of housing types in all neighborhoods. So, but again, there's discretion even in that. A mix, what does that even mean? Typically we apply that, single family detached. You could say lot size variation. Doesn't mean you have to have 1,000 square foot homes and 5,000 square foot homes. There's again, interpretation of that. So the comp plan has aspirational statements that help or enable the zoning code, but a lot of the subjectivity and hard to legislate appropriateness of density. And again, sometimes even the policies seem to conflict a bit in there depending on the case. But for an example, we have a want and a need for affordable housing too. So how does that play in with some of the protection of private property rights? Sometimes people can make those types of claims. So, and this is just a little bit more kind of in our profession. It was in the video a little bit as well. Zoning has historically, so the way our Unified Development Code is classified, it's not form-based. What we use is typically referred to as Euclidean zoning. So we do use zoning to basically designate areas where, again, in using the film as an example, industrial areas we aren't going to put next to housing, or we aren't putting the adult entertainment next to the school. That's Euclidean zoning. This is your commercial district. This is your residential district. A lot of times we'll use office as a way to transition. So we have buffer requirements, right, in code, 20, 25 foot land use buffer sometimes. Office is a very good transitional use because most of those users are done at 5 or 6 o'clock when most people are coming home. So if you have some commercial or industrial, we'll sometimes try to feather an LO around them and then the residential, butt those two uses typically up. So that's in a very high level nutshell explaining Euclidean zoning is the separation of land uses. Society, though, is going more and more to mixed use, right? So then you get nuances in there. Okay, well, is this use, how much of a nuisance is that use potentially with the people that are living 200 feet away? And that's why a lot of communities are going to different types of zoning codes and ordinances. We're not there yet. And maybe we'll never get there. I don't know. But my point with some of that is we try with some of the, we do standardize some of that, saying if you have CG next to R8, you have to put in a 25-foot buffer, period. That's part of the code. You do that. But there are some things, again, within that where there's discretion and you can require more. If they want to annex and 25-foot buffer is not enough, or you can limit height. Height is another example in the UDC. The base code, caps all of our zoning districts to a certain height, whether it be 35 or 65 or 75 feet in some commercial industrial districts. But again, my point there is, and I want to have a little bit of a conversation, because this is something that I've heard from council too, to some degree, is this need to put transitions in potentially in the UDC, and it's something I'm not sure how to do. I'll use examples too of odd shaped lots or pie shaped lots, and 1-to-1 isn't a bad, idea, or 2-to-1 even, and saying, hey, generally we like, but it's the generally part, right? You can get a lot that's running east-west and they have north-south lots, and it's like, all right, this lot is 500 feet long, like only 1-to-1 or even 2-to-1. That makes it tough to lay a project out on the other side of that lot line. So again, standardizing that and saying thou shalt, in no case shall you have, 3 backyards to 1, for me is very difficult to legislate, because I love to play devil's advocate. I can come up with an example of where that doesn't make sense. But I think you can generally have an agreed practice to say, listen, that's not an appropriate transition. That's not the intent of that. And where you typically have north-south lots and they're lining up north-south lots, 2-to-1, I think is fair. But again, that's part of this process, the public hearing process. But I want to hear your thoughts on some of that. And again, in the comp plan, we say, appropriate transitions. We don't tell you what that is. If someone's got a 2-story home, is 3-story next to it appropriate? If they have a single level, 2, and you've had those discussions too, right? That transition in height, what's appropriate? Well, you got to kind of hear from folks and see what they deem appropriate, and then you get to decide. So I know there's some comments, and that's what I'm asking for. So.
Mr. Chair.
Go right ahead.
I think it's challenging also with some of the developers that go out and buy this land. And then they kind of figure out what they're going to do with it, or what they can get away with it later. And the example I'm going to use, and Andy, you weren't here for this one, but Patrick and I there was a storage facility on Eagle Road across the street from a development that had 3 stories, but the zoning for the west side of the street was really only 2 stories. And the guy was trying to negotiate with us like, okay, well, give me 64 feet instead of 35, we'll meet in the middle. And we're like, we're not the deciding factor here. And so, some of it needs to kind of go back on the developer, if you're going to look for a piece of infill land and you want to develop it, shouldn't you have kind of an idea of what you're going to do with it before you come? And then when planning and zoning or city planners saying, yeah, this doesn't fit into the thing, they need to kind of reconsider. And so if I feel sometimes the burden is put on us, like we're not being reasonable enough, even though they bought this weird shaped pie, L, whatever the case might be, and they're trying to make it work, which totally makes sense, but they're not following any of the rules that the zoning even allows. And that puts I think a burden on us, because then we're being unreasonable. So that's a little bit trend for that one. And as far as transitions are concerned, I don't know if it is within policy or like you said, it's just more of a suggestion. If I'm in a 5-acre parcel, obviously high density is not, I don't want that in my back door. And so this trend that we're doing, where we're going from 5 acres to maybe 3 acres, or maybe to 1 acre, or high density or low density to medium and then to high, seems just to make more sense, because It just seems kind of crazy to have a 5-acre parcel and the next door to it, you've got apartment buildings. So I appreciate that as a citizen of this community to be able to kind of see those transitions.
And I will just say, and that's just kind of the last bullet there. I do appreciate that, and I don't disagree with that. I think what I would ask though is you again, you got to consider multiple things simultaneously, right? So that 5-acre parcel, if we're annexing it now, is not going to be a 5-acre parcel for very much longer. I respect that someone wants to stay there and have that quality of life they've enjoyed as a 5-acre parcel, but that's going to redevelop at some point, right? So you need to be respectful of them today and understand that. So I'm not saying just slam all the apartments next to that, but you also need to figure out then, okay, what happens when that 5 acres come in and they say, but I'm high density and, now the transition slippers on the other foot, right? And it's like, well, we didn't set ourselves up for success as a city because we allowed lesser on that property and now the transition's taking longer to get there, if that makes sense. I don't use it's kind of the same side of the coin. I get a different side of the coin. If it's 1-to-1, we'll never transition anything, right? It's just going to be the same thing. So I think just that's my request a little bit is be respectful, certainly, of that property owner, the 5-acre property owner that's here that says, this is my backyard and you need to respect my cows and what I do there or whatever the case may be. Absolutely. Also need to be forward thinking though and saying, okay, I respect that, but here's what we need to do. And maybe there's something you can condition that says you're with the phasing plan next door. It says, hey, this is your last phase and you don't develop this first or whatever those mitigating things are you can do to make that transition easier for the community over time. So good points, but that is a great example of, you're juggling all kinds of different competing interests simultaneously. I don't know if we should, because I know council had it on their agenda Tuesday, the Eagle Road Storage Unit
They
project.
Did they pass it?
That's what I can't remember if they continued.
They did?
Actually, I'm going to advise that you not
Yeah.
dig deep into that because the council did consider and make a decision,
Yeah.
but they have not yet adopted their findings
Okay.
in final
Okay.
order.
Yeah.
So I'd
Thank
prefer
you.
not to dig
Yeah.
deeper into that one.
So,
I'll
but
look at the
I'll
notes.
use, just that to start a similar conversation. Again, there's things to consider. You got a major arterial on a roadway and you've got pretty, I'll just say, can have pretty dense, intense land uses even on the other side of that, but maybe it's not 65 feet tall.
Right.
So I think the things that staff looks at is the appropriateness. But again, we may define that differently than you do, differently than council does. So we all kind of look at things maybe a little bit differently. Someone focuses more on the principal arterial side of the world and says, hey, there's 50,000 cars a day here. Why can't I have 3 stories? And someone says, but I'm trying to raise my kids 50 feet away. And so what's the, so again, not an easy job and you don't get paid anything. So it's good conversation. And if there's any more on the transition, any more thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I would totally agree with you, Caleb, that it seems like it's a little bit more of an art than a science.
Mhm.
So to try to codify that would be difficult. To the extent though that there's some standards, some criteria that we might look at, I don't know if you can create ranges of things to look at and consider to bring it, to pull it maybe from the art side a little bit more to the science side. I don't know. I'm really just talking off the top of my head right
Well,
now.
if I can just, and that thought a little bit, maybe if I can extract that out a little bit more, and it's not the same, but I'll use it because the comp plan is more the art and the UDC is more the science. And what I think we can do is put some more things on the art side, i.e. the comp plan side of that world that talks about appropriate transitions, but doesn't standardize them, right? It gives a little more to the 5-acre parcel or whatever, right? The existing thing that's there. But it's not going to say thou shalt do 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or no more than this or whatever. But it can still have words that say you need to seriously consider appropriate transitions. Again, I'm not off the top of my head. That doesn't sound eloquent. We wouldn't put that in the comp plan, but something similar in the comprehensive plan that is more policy and not so standard. So a little more art than the science tried and true, but it helps. It still helps to cite those things, still
Right.
citing comp plan policies when you're making your decision. And again, I got some things on that kind of near the end, I think is very helpful.
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
Okay.
Just some of the, I'll just call it some of the ambiguity that's in there is sometimes frustrating, especially when we have lawyers presenting to us. Nothing against lawyers, but it is difficult sometimes because they have an absolute point that's based in the UDC where we're trying to more apply the comp plan, vision to what we're seeing here. So that to me is when things get a little bit frustrating, but I understand why it's there, especially after working on some of the, the open space committees and things like that, where we don't want to ratchet it down so much that people can't bring us something that makes us go,
Innovative.
wow,
Mhm.
that's really cool. That's really neat, and reward them for it. Because I think if we do, kind of strangle that down too much, then it'll lead to people, having less ability or capability to do that. And we have had some things come through that have been, really neat, fascinating, new ideas, new ways to look at things or develop things. And I think we want to kind of champion that going forward as we can. So, and then as far as the density, I mean, that just kind of plays right into that for me, that not everything's going to fit exactly the way that we want it to fit. And the more infill that we do, we're going to find more and more of that. I think one of the things to definitely keep in mind for us is to kind of strive for more of that vision, but understand that, our role here is fairly limited in what we see in the UDC and the comp plan. So the comp plan definitely gives us a little more latitude to input our personal feelings into it. But at the same time, the UDC standards are what we have to carry forward. But what's said here at planning and zoning and kind of the direction that we give applicants does have a bearing on it. So there are several things that we have said here, and city council has taken those to heart and acted on them. We don't always agree on everything. There's some things that we recommend approval on, they'll deny it, and just the opposite. But I do know that it does have a bearing on even the most recent stuff that's went through. I'll just leave it at that. So, I mean, a lot of these applications are, by the time they get to city council, what we've recommended here is it's there. They've already done those things because they do see that there's a little bit of harmony happening between planning and zoning and council. So, don't be afraid to mention it or throw it out as an idea. Again, asking a lot of questions, especially of, people giving public testimony can kind of help us shape some of that as we send it on its way up to council. So anyway, I ramble enough. Go right ahead.
And my only comment to that is that I appreciate that every application is unique. And I've said that in council to different parties. We look at each individual because just because you put it at 10-mile interchange doesn't mean it should be, at McDermott at Franklin, or it shouldn't be at McMillan or someplace else. So in that particular case, that's where like the art comes in, the science has been applied, but just because we allowed it in a space that's identical 2 miles down the road doesn't mean it's applicable in another space that's identical to it 2 miles in a different direction. So, I've said that in chambers before to people, and sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. But that's what I like when we look at each individual application on its own merit and not necessarily comparing to what is surrounding it. Taking it in account, but not necessarily saying, well, just because there's a Jimmy John's next door doesn't mean you get to, put a Subway next to it just because you can't.
If I can,
Go ahead.
to that point a little bit, I mean, I think it is nice to have tenure and experience, though. You don't have to, because you did it over here, doesn't mean you have to do it over there. But it does help, right? You've seen similar things before, but everything is case by case, site specific, and no two are the same. So it's good, just, and you don't even have to necessarily recall it, but to have that tucked away somewhere, and I think it's helpful over time, right? You see some similar things and themes that come up with projects. So that's why I want to do what I can to keep you all engaged and learning and keep volunteering. Because it does take some time to get up to speed and produce fruit, if you will, for the community. So that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. The other thing I wanted to just maybe touch on real quick is I get it, whether it be an attorney or a hired gun from the applicant or whoever that just speaks with some authority, right? Like this is the way things are. And again, I'm not calling anyone a liar. Sometimes though, there's half truths or there's only one side of the story that they're telling you. So I would encourage you to clarify either with them or ask us. Things can be said as factual or absolute. I'm entitled to this. You have to allow me to do this because the code says this, or whatever the case may be. You hear those absolute types of, and it maybe just doesn't feel right. I would encourage you, again, is in the same vein as ask those questions. And I don't care who's saying it. You're going to hear some of those things sometimes. And I'm not saying what they're saying isn't true, but usually there's a little more to the story. The city does not typically give you just this blank, sorry to be repeating, slate entitlement. And you can say, well, I got my zoning, so your comp plan doesn't apply. That's not necessarily, it can be the case. And there's case law even that says, but guess what? We put something in the DA that says you have to comply with the comp plan in the future. So that trumps this case law that you're referring to. So just, again, no one says, not saying anything that's not factual, but it's not the whole truth. So anyways, I'll let that go. But feel free to ask us or them to clarify those things. I think that
And
can help.
always remember, we have Kurt. And I mean, I know I've leaned on you several times to, keep us from being in trouble, but we also have had applications. I mean, we had the application come in for the multifamily that was going to go in behind the Walmart, and that was just hotly contested all the way through the process. And I thought legal counsel did a good job of helping to guide us to the decision that was made, not only in planning and zoning, but also at city council, because I watched that, those hearings. And to me, that's just don't forget that we have that. And if you do have a question that is legal in nature, or if you even wondering if it's legal in nature, Kurt's been good to us. So
Yep, always happy to help.
Just a comment, don't need to discuss it really, but just a comment. I think the consideration isn't so much that any one of us up here aren't willing to call someone out on it. It's sort of that respectful citizen dynamic that we want to make sure we don't come across as overbearing and over governmental regulatory. And so we entertain a lot of things. And I know personally, I'm a little bit more, I'm willing to do that maybe more than I should. And I should maybe ask more questions along those lines, but I'm trying to be respectful because I think that's what we want to project from the city. And so it's just a little balance. That's all.
And my request, I know you said you did, and you didn't really have a question, but, and I've got a slide here about the art of asking questions. I think you can ask clarifying questions in a respectful manner and direct them to, hey, Kurt, I wasn't quite understanding. They made this statement. Can you explain how that works a little bit better? Or what, whatever, to clarify where we're not calling them out, but you're asking clarifying questions that maybe help. And I'll just say also, it is, unless it's something just, or we just can't stay silent. Typically we're going to sit here and let whatever said be said unless you engage and ask that question. So, we're going to assume, and it happens from time to time. It's like, hold on a minute. That's what they just said. No, but we're not doing that either, right? We want to be respectful. We're not sitting here and calling someone a liar. So I think there is a way that we can, again, ground truth some of those things, so everyone understands what was said and clarify what was said and what's on the books or not on the books or what's entitled or not entitled in a respectful manner. So anyways, but we need to be engaged usually. It's like, hey, they made this statement, can you help me clarify? And we may or may not be able to, clarify what they said or what they meant by what they're saying, but we can clarify what's on the books or entitled or whatever, those types of things. Okay, kind of transitioning again, and this is what I referred to at the beginning, these next 6 or 8 slides. And by the way, if anyone wants that again, some of you, it's been a minute or two since you were handed the handbook. It's not really a handbook, but our slides. But I can share this again if anyone is interested in a re-review of orientation materials. But these ones we often fly through. So I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time, see if there's any questions. I kind of mentioned some of this already. I mean, some of this will just come over time too. As you get hours in that seat, you'll just pick up more and more all the time. But these are just some best practices. I'm not going to read the slide to you there. And same with the knowledge part, right? Again, Lupa, I don't expect you to memorize any of this, but you should know about it, right? You should know where it's at, how to access it. At least, hey, I remember hearing something about this. Can you help me? Private property rights, how is that? What is our role in that? Again, don't feel like you have to memorize any of this stuff, but have some knowledge of what the comp plan is and does. Some of the, UDC information. You'll pick up on some of the, and again, we mentioned this to new commissioners, if we say ACHD and you're like, wait, what was ACHD again? Some of the acronyms, the short, some of the planning jargon we use, we try not to, but we fall into that trap a lot of times. Help. Hey, wait a minute, hold on. Before you move on, what is that term? What does that mean? We have the glossary too. So again, if anyone needs the glossary again, want that kind of shortcut, I'd be happy to share that as well. Again, Robert's rules, some of the procedures were pretty good there. And again, you get more and more comfortable over time with that. But and that group dynamic, right? That only comes with time spent together. And so you get a feel for each other and anticipate. Oh, I think they're going to ask a question about this or that or whatever. So, but working together as a team, really, and feeding off of each other. I've seen some of that, right? Hey, I'm gonna, echo some of what was just said. I got my own thing. So, that consensus building, getting to a, it does, and you don't have to be unified all the time, right? It can be 3-2. It can be split vote. There's nothing wrong with that. But you should be, again, we're representing the city. We're going to be professional. We're going to be courteous. Those types of things. Listening. And again, I'm not wagging my finger at anybody. These are just best practices. This isn't because something that's happened and I'm here now. I'm, legal said, hey, you better talk to the commission about this. This is just a reminder. Especially that last one a little bit, watch your nonverbal cues. I think I've got a couple of slides or the next slide on that too. It is okay, and this came up too. It is okay to share your personal beliefs and thoughts, your real life experiences. I think that's fair. We want to be sensitive though to their perspective as well, whoever they may be, the applicant, the public, whoever's before you. You're going to give them your attention and respect their views. So again, here's some things, don't be on your phone, searching Google, checking in on Facebook, give them your attention, please. This doesn't mean you have to sit up perfectly straight and eye contact the whole time, but just some things to be aware of, right? It doesn't mean you can't, have a little, to the chair, hey, I got a question, a little bit of that's fine. Again, this is pretty common sense stuff, but I think it's a good refresher. The refer by name, and we talked about that a little bit because that came up at the joint meeting. We're still trying to figure out how we can help with that. I haven't talked to the clerk yet, but maybe there's a way, sign-in sheet, we have people's names. Maybe there's a way we can project that on your, here's who signed in, and if you didn't catch their name, they mumbled, and I live at, we have some of that information. It's not going to be a perfect system though. I don't know how we can do that. We are talking about too, again, just working with the applicants and saying who's going to present. You at least would have their contact information. But someone just from the audience can come up and mumble their name, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that. The chair maybe can assist with some of that. Hey, we didn't quite catch that. Can you, what was your name again? It's a way to do that kind of tactfully. but we're trying to see if there's a way we can improve that a little bit. And this is the pep speech, I guess. So keep the faith. We do change them though, right? I mean, they're not perfect. I mentioned that earlier too. Things change in our community, in our society. COVID, we're still dealing with some of that, and some of that stuff you're going to see with drive-throughs. I mean, the amount of drive-throughs that everyone wants pickup now. No one's going in to eat at restaurants. People are, but there's still more and more of that pickup or drive-through in our society, and so we are changing our codes because they're antiquated, and you're seeing a bunch of CUPs for drive-throughs, and for why? The second bullet I think is a good one. To me, you can be swayed by public testimony, but you shouldn't be pressured, right? So you can have good points and you should consider them, but you shouldn't feel obligated or pressured like, oh, am I going to make it out to my car if I say no to this project, right? Or, hey, I know you're friends, or I hold something over you or whatever. Don't feel pressured to make any decision. Really stay within the confines of the code and the comp plan. And again, your real life, experiences and what you think is best for Meridian. But not so. And again, there's a difference between personal bias and personal experience, right? You observe. That doesn't necessarily mean in every case you can't approve a Starbucks because you don't like their coffee. That's just there's a difference. Keeping things relevant, fair and impartial. You've heard that before too. So come into that, do your research, but you should be open-minded to hearing, the process out. I touched on this a little bit, but again, that rapport, the collective decision-making, it's not bad now, but again, you have 2 fairly new commissioners. That'll just improve, I think. Again, respectful and courteous doesn't mean you have to agree on every topic. But again, listen, hear people out, including your peers there at the dais. And I'm not doing a good job with the one at the end there, monitor your airtime. I don't see any of you dominating, the meetings necessarily. The chair obviously, is probably going to say more words than anybody else at any given meeting, but allow the opportunities for, again, your peers to have their say. I think you guys are really good about that too. And here's the ones that I mentioned. There was some of this, and again, I'm not going to read every one of these, but if you think Councilman Kavanagh does a good job at some of this too, I think it's fair, right? You can ask questions of staff, the applicant. I think that's the next slide is actually public, colleagues. So just some cues for, what would you do different? Engage with them, ask them some follow-up questions. Doesn't mean you have to, but you can. Even your fellow commissioners, and I know you do that too, right? You typically at the end of presentations and testimony, hey, what do you guys think? But I'll go back to that first one again. Engage staff if you really have questions. We're able to flag if we really see concerns, or you'll see something on our face like, but feel free too. If you really are like, that doesn't sound right. I don't remember that being, have we had anything else like that? Is what they're saying the case here? And you do that in a more tactful manner than I just said it, but
I do have to say it's easy to read that. Like maybe we're going off the rails from probably Sonia than anyone else. He kind of looks like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, can I interject a couple thoughts on this? So I also think this slide and the next are really helpful. So we don't have to do a deep dive tonight, but I think it's worth taking a look at for a couple reasons. One of which will be selfish on my part from a legal perspective, but first and foremost, I think it's just a really good way to engage the public, the applicant, as well as public testimony in a very respectful, productive way. Instead of just listening and being stone-faced or saying just thank you. It's the opportunity to ask either the applicant or a person from the public that's testifying, thoughts about well, we're probably going to do something like this at some point, but do you have some thoughts to mitigate the impact on your adjacent property or your neighborhood? Or do you have some ideas for conditions, or so where you can make it more of a back and forth and constructive instead of just opposition? The part I like about that selfishly from a legal perspective is we probably use this term a few times already tonight, but we'll talk frequently from the staff perspective about the record. And so when courts look at issues like this, or when there's controversy, it's very helpful to be able to have a record showing that, the commission and the council, the hearing in general was fair, it was open, people had a chance to engage, it wasn't one-sided, there wasn't bias. And so that extra sort of interaction where it's an opportunity to identify issues, get them on the record, address them, show to others, judges in particular, that we looked at all sides and we were fair about that and balanced. That can be helpful, and I think that is what it is. I'll just put that to the side. But most importantly, it's just a really good way to gather information for you all as a commission to make good, informed decisions. And you can gather more information without, you're not being, antagonistic or overly probing. It's just more of a conversational way to do it by asking a question, and people appreciate the opportunity to give some additional, thoughts. So those are just a couple supplemental ideas.
I would even, sorry, Bill, real quick. I would even, and I'll lay it down sort of as a challenge. You don't have to accept the challenge. But I do think, and I will use council as an example, they're pretty good. Someone takes the time out to come down here. Usually you can even throw them a softball, maybe even know the answer to it. Hey, where's your property in relation to this property? Oh, okay, thank you. Something while they're here that is a follow-up question. Hopefully there's something meaty and you really have a question. You're like, oh, can you explain this a little bit more, a follow-up or something that really engages them? But even something as simple as, help me out with, why you're interested in this, or something that is a pretty even simple answer, but it's engaging, not just thank you for being here, name and address, they sit down. It doesn't have to be everybody necessarily, especially if you got a packed house, right? That could drag on, but some level of, again, maybe even know the answer, but you're going to ask them so that they're aware that you're listening and you're engaged. So, anyways, just council's they really are good at that. When someone takes the time out to come here, they have something they want to follow up with them on.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I just wanted to say there's other techniques too. I mean, we've been doing this together for a while, and I know a lot of times public testimony can drag on and you're hearing the same topics over and over. It's a very good idea just to say, hey, we summarize, this is what I've heard from a majority of you, transportation, enrollment numbers. Is there anyone here that would like to add something new to the conversation that we haven't heard? And just try to redirect people so that you're not getting the same thing over and over, because certainly, as you all know, people come here with emotion, and sometimes it's hard to hold back your emotions when you're passionate about your property. So I think I think that's a good opportunity for you to summarize and say, we've heard this. Can you contribute something new that we haven't heard yet? Or is there something that we can explain better for you to help you understand, since we're getting the same topic over and over, and redirect it to staff, legal, or even the applicant when they come back up.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I know I don't do that. I know some of the people that I've followed through up to the chair were much better at that than I am. So I'll try to keep that in mind as I go through and try and formulate it. So I kind of get lost in the minutia of it sometimes, but it is true. There's about the 7th or 8th time you've heard the same exact thing, especially if they're reading off a form letter. I know that some folks do that too, and they just insert their little blurb in there. It does tend to kind of wear on the night. Sure.
There's a little bit of an art form to that too, right? Like, I think you can acknowledge that concern you've heard for the 7th or 8th time and sort of get away or across to the audience. Like, we get it. You're starting to bug us. If we hear another 7 or 8 people, you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't say it that way, right? But it's something like, hey guys, and you kind of they're like, okay, they heard us, and if we say it more, we're likely gonna push them away, you know? So, again, it's more of an art form, and you need to listen to whatever, if they get 3 minutes, they can basically say whatever they want, but I think it's a good reminder to say, yeah, we've got it, you know, and if there's a finer point to that, we'll listen to that too. Yeah, that's tough to do. But I think with just some, again, even with some body language or the way you say things, like, okay, we get it. And again, I won't read this. In fact, I don't even know if I had any on this slide to call to your attention, but, yeah, if there's something next to your monitors besides the password to log in, I think I'd put this next to it. You know, here's just best practices of, you know, things to remember. Pretty high level, right? Nothing very super specific, but, and you don't write the findings, but give us, when you're making a decision, you know, the all staff and applicant testimony stuff helps, but it's, you know, give us some reasons that you're supporting a project or recommending denial of a project and whatnot.
Maybe can I chime in on that one
Yeah.
as well? So this is, I think the commission does a good job of this historically and, you know, of late as well. But here's just I want to comment a little bit about number 5 and 6 sort of combined. That's make a good record and make written findings and conclusions. And, you know, staff does take the lead on the written findings and conclusions, but this is the part I want to talk about with regard to that issue, which is it's very helpful for you know, for everybody involved, the applicant, community members, for the council if they're looking at your decision, for staff as they write findings and conclusions of law, and then particularly if we get challenged in court, in particular, it's very important, is to kind of articulate your thought process. So what I mean by that is that there's sort of kind of a flow to how that happens, right? So you're going to hear a bunch of testimony, whatever the issue might be, but perhaps pro and con. You know, so you need to weigh that information of, you know, you heard testimony in favor, testimony against. That kind of fell into 3 categories. Let's summarize what those were. You know, traffic, schools, and whatever, transition. And then a little discussion about, you know, I found this was more compelling to me. That, you know, traffic I think is manageable here because, and a little bit of a reasoning behind that, some explanation as to, you know, you heard both sides, the pros, the cons, you weighed the evidence, and you find that the evidence more weighs on this side, wherever that side might be. So that's kind of part 1 of the thought process. Then part 2 is those conclusions of law, which is, again, staff will write, you know, the written version of that, but it's apply those findings to the criteria, typically the UDC provisions that says, you know, you have findings to make, and, you know, so you make your findings, your, you know, the facts of the before you, and then does it fit into the UDC requirements? Can you, you know, does it fit the requirements that you're required to make? Is that whether it meets the UDC, the law in this instance? And so those things put together lead then to the final, which is, you know, if you're the final decision maker, like on a conditional use permit, that would be your final, you know, that would lead to a decision and order that says we approve it or we approve it with changes, whatever it might be. Or if it's in case of a recommendation, it just goes to the council with your recommendation. But I guess my point, just to kind of wrap all that up in a sentence or two, is that it's really helpful to explain your reasoning. I heard these facts, I reached these conclusions based upon the UDC, therefore my decision or my recommendation is X. You know, just to be able to kind of articulate how you got from point 1 to the final point, as opposed to just jumping to the final point.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, maybe if you could help a little bit, I try to start the discussion when we close public testimony and we talk amongst ourselves with a sort of statement like, I'm leaning or I'm looking at it this way, because I don't want to look like a fool if I change my mind. And the first person that goes it's a little tough, right? Because we don't, especially on one that's a little bit, it could go either way. And so you don't know what your fellow commissioners are thinking, and you don't want to be the only guy way out on a limb. But I guess I would say, number 1, probably got to stick to your guns. If your gut's telling you and you're looking at something a certain way, it is what it is. But try to leave open the possibility that my fellow commissioners could, persuade me in a different direction. So I know it's not easy to be the first guy to say something on some things. And so if you have any thoughts or tips on that, it's probably welcome.
And your fellow commissioners may have some thoughts and tips on that too. I guess what I would say is, follow your gut after considering, reading the staff report, hearing staff's presentation and all that. Yes, you're gonna then really start to form your opinion on the project. Not you can't be swayed, but really you're largely done with what your facts are that you're considering, not what, again, we don't need to all agree. I heard, and I guess my advice to you then, sort of that way, and again, advice may even be a little strong. My tip, my whatever, maybe, is to say, hey, I like this about the project, don't like that about the project, or something. Hey, this is kind of cool, or that, I don't know. What do you guys think about it? There's a way that you don't have to put all your cards out there and say, hey, I'm going to support, I'm likely to support it, or I'm leaning towards this or whatever. You can just say, hey, I kind of like this, don't really understand that. I am kind of concerned about this though, and just start that discussion more if you're really, and I would also just say, easier said than done, right? No one is gonna, I know I don't judge you if you do change your mind or whatever. You don't have to stick to your guns necessarily. If you're persuaded, but you're like, oh shoot, I already said I like the project, but you bring up some good point. Well, I got to support the project. No, do what's in the best interest of the community. You got to kind of put your pride aside and go, you know what? I do think that, no, never mind. This project, I don't think it works. I am convinced by the conversation. So I guess I would just keep that open mind and not let your pride or whatever that may be get in the way a little bit. Consider the facts. And to Kurt's point in the slide, and I changed it on you because you were talking on all these.
Thank you.
But tell the story. Hey, this is compelling to me, and for that reason, right now I'm leaning towards this, but I could be swayed because I'm still, again, that over there. It's kind of I don't know.
Okay, I had that last point in particular. I had the same thought as Caleb, so I'll get to that in just 30 seconds or so. But I think that's excellent advice, and I like how you framed it. I think that's a really good technique, is to say, if you're the first or second speaker or the commissioner making comment, I like the idea of, these are my initial thoughts. I'm leaning this direction. I like the idea of saying these are things I like, some things I don't like. And then, you can end that by saying, but I want to reserve my until I reserve my judgment until I hear from my fellow commissioners. It's always a nice way to kind of wrap that up. And then to the part that Caleb mentioned, I really liked a lot, because my same thought is that I don't think if you listen to your fellow commissioners and they say something that changes your mind, I say I admire that you're a thoughtful person, you listen to your colleagues, something resonated with you, and you say, you know what, that makes sense to me. I think I'm moving this other direction. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think that's a positive thing, that you're working as a team, you're listening to your colleagues, and that's what deliberation is all about. You're all talking it through, thinking it through, and you're reaching a conclusion. And then I guess lastly, I'll say what Caleb has said several times now, which is, at the end of the day, if it's not unanimous, that's perfectly fine as well. If you end up, whatever the vote might be, 3-2, 4-1, whatever it might be, that's perfectly fine. That's not an issue either.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I'll say I've been the person out on a limb, so, and I do tend to stick to my guns on a lot of stuff, but I have been swayed as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different elements to it, and some of the most learning I've done, to be perfectly honest, is when there is a lot of, not necessarily division, but different viewpoints on the commission, talking about it different ways, looking at it from different perspectives, and a lot of times that'll end up in, a split vote, fairly even on both sides, with, one vote deciding. So sometimes that makes things a little bit, there's a lot of information that comes out of that. So sometimes that's easier for council to act on. Sometimes it is a little more difficult, because there's just so much that goes into it. So much that's relatable on either side of it. So, but yeah, I don't know. I guess since the beginning, I haven't been afraid to let them know what I think. So, and again, the idea that we should all think the same, that's why there is That's why there's so many people that are up here on the commission, to make sure that we are looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. And even to the point of choosing commissioners, we want to make sure that we have, people that are in the area of impact, people that are north of the freeway, south of the freeway, in different places, so that we, because the issues that are happening, kind of in our southeast are not necessarily the same issues that are happening in our northwest. So it's good to have a lot of diversity up here to kind of help handle that.
And I'm not afraid of looking the fool. I do it routinely. But my commissioners, you guys often bring up a lot of good points that I just hadn't thought of. And so I like the idea of sort of reserving the ability to go, well, I'm open to being persuaded. So
That is what that deliberation time is for. What did you hear? Consider all the facts and talk it out. The one thing, so again, Kurt covered most of the things on this slide. I do want to spend just a minute kind of on the conditions part of that. And this is another one sometimes where, I'll wave a flag if you guys are like, hold on a minute, don't require them to do that. We're headed down the wrong path if you say, go build that sidewalk, 2 miles away from your project, because there isn't a correlation to the impact of this project. They aren't out to solve the world's problems. If it's something they need to mitigate that's appropriate for them, fine. But again, some of that should be, you're causing, this is likely to happen if we approve your project, therefore this condition to mitigate that impact on our community. That should also be part of your thought process and the pros and cons. And hey, we're implementing this condition because, you've got, these are 4-bedroom homes and we're afraid of, not enough, I don't know, whatever, that some nexus back to whatever your condition is. It should tie back somehow to that project. But we can help you a little bit with that if there's, and again, I haven't seen you kind of go off the rails and say, go build an interchange and go, whatever. So, but just remember that it really should be kind of direct impacts and proportionate to their impacts. If it's a 2-lot subdivision, having them do something that's going to cost $20 million, probably is not an
So
appropriate
I
condition.
can't ask all applicants to build a bike path.
You can. We'll probably say don't in this case, but if it doesn't connect, if it's the bike path to nowhere, then, but. Okay, so I think I'm about done. I did want to just, those training videos, if you just go to idahoapa.org, that's where I got the one. And there are, again, and they're still building the library, but there's 6 or 7 up there now. Go there. They have a knowledge center, conferences and events. I think I mentioned this. It's a small budget, but we have a budget for the commission. So if you say, you know what, hey, down in the Grove, they're having a training about housing or density or whatever, you see something like that, we may be able to get you to a training too. So they have some of those things locally, usually within the state anyways, that are there with conferences and other events. They have some policy guides and legislation. Here's my disclaimer a little bit, all of those may or may not align with the city's kind of legal interpretation of some of those things, but for the most part, I think you're pretty safe, pretty good. Jerry Mason, who you saw in there, has been, I don't know, kind of doing a lot of that since the 80s, I think. So there's some good stuff there anyways, but anyway, so that website is one I would send you to. The American Planning Association also has some briefs and some other things if you want to get a little bit bigger picture where the profession stands on some of these topics. You can. It really is that last one that I wanted to just sort of highlight for you, that there are some good resources there. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know who we are. In fact, this slide is outdated as of today. Because we are promoting Nick Napoli. So you will be seeing Nick at a hearing probably July or August. So he's going to transition. He's going to start. Stacy's going to kind of start to help train him up. Bill will obviously help train him up, but Nick was promoted today from assistant to associate planner. So if you haven't met Nick, you will soon. But this is the team. We'll be back likely in the fall or winter with another type of a training. We were opportunistic. Thank you for bringing it to our attention that wasn't anything and everyone had it on their calendar. So we might as well do some training. I do have a list. It's a little dated now, but I still have a list of potential topics for the future, but I am open to whatever, inviting ACHD, and I'm going to tell them, if we come, we aren't going to totally throw you under the bus or ask you, all the hard questions, but not going to guarantee there won't be some hard questions. But some of those types of things. So if there's other trainings or guest speakers or things like that, you're like, hey, I want to hear from someone or about a topic. We'll see if I know somebody that can maybe help with that presentation. So you don't have to do that now. If you want to call that phone number or my direct line or whatever, and you're like, hey, can we get a guest speaker to talk on this or whatever, whatever you want to hear. But likely, again, we'll be back later this year to do some more discussion. I don't want to call it training, but have a discussion on best practices and whatever topics you all want. So appreciate your time tonight. A little more than 20 minutes, but, and we can keep going too. If there's other things that are just on your heart now, let's do it.
Commissioners? Anything further? No? Really appreciate the time and I mean, some of this is a review and some of it's newer information for those of us that haven't been through it in quite a while. So always appreciate the refresher in there and do appreciate the dedication that the staff has to providing, really good information. The new staff report, that is gonna, I mean, that's just a highlight on what you guys are doing to help improve things. For us that have to sit up here and deliberate on all this stuff. So, again, staff does a great job. And again, Kurt, really appreciate your guidance on some things to help keep us out of trouble. And yeah, we'll just keep on doing this. And I know that everybody's doing their best to provide, what the city needs long-term. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep. With that, I will take one more motion.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.